I love this, man. This is so spot on. And you know, it's interesting. A lot of the people that I've worked with, you know, when I had an aha moment, it was actually after a number of sessions that, you know, we had done, and that aha ambiguity moment, because I always approached it from the risk piece every time. And that's why I say my opinion has fundamentally changed in about a year and a half, because now I feel like I have the ability to understand the ambiguity. And I'm hoping, we'll find out in a month, man, but I'm hoping I'm going to be able to pivot between the two.
Well, let's. I'm gonna keep smashing you with slides until you tell me not to, just because like it's fresh on my mind. I hadn't even delivered this class for about 3 years. I've been so busy doing Power Platform, but we got one opportunity to do it just for the end of the year with our staff and one of our clients, and really enjoyed the session. I'd forgotten how much I used to enjoy, you know, teaching this stuff. Okay, so then you go, all right. So the reason I put this up here is, you know how kids have teddy bears, right?
Yeah.
Teddy bear is an ambiguity coping mechanism. Think about it. Little kids, right? World is overwhelming. You know, lots of things are scary to a child. You don't have a hell of a lot of life experience to be able to absorb and be the scaffolding for going out and taking risks. So, and that's called attachment theory, right? Kids would grab onto something and it helps them kind of transition from something that was overwhelming, and it gives them the safety and the structure to, you know, move forward. So it turns out though that if you yank it, like everyone's done this. I don't know if are your kids into their teddy bears or security blankets? Are yours young? But like
I've got a 3-year-old that's obsessed with his blanket, man. Like he just
Ashlee had Toby the bear. She even wrote a song about that bear. I shouldn't be telling you that, but anyway, no. But now here's the thing about this, and I think this slide's still here. It turns out that this is a primal thing, right? They give toys to like baby animals to cope with separation anxiety, either when they've been abandoned or when they have to, you know, they have a medical issue or, you know, that kind of scenario. So this is something that's actually been with us since like forever. I've, you know, seen my cat as a kitten was very much like this. And dogs, you know, don't get me started. So then the contention that we made was, you know, because I got absolutely fascinated by ambiguity in the facilitation work I was doing, which I'll show you later. Like I saw it manifest in so many different ways. And so our kind of core contention was adults don't stop using teddy bears, right? In fact, the teddy bears just take on very different forms. Right. Yeah. So you know, like this is a true story. A business partner of mine, he had a dude who would walk around with a methodology under his arm. He carried it everywhere. No one ever saw him open it up. So like this dude's teddy bear had actually become real. He would carry it. But you know how you get people that are either model obsessed, they're process obsessed, or some management guru, but you know, the body of knowledge one. So, and then like just to really rub it in, I threw this up, and some of these you might have, including I had to throw a SharePoint one in there at the time just to sort of rub it in. And this is the thing though, I saw really bad stuff happen in the with best of intentions. Microsoft went, what are all the bits of governance, right? And they divided it up, right? And they gave you all the things that you should do. And organizations around the world took this as if it's a paint by numbers thing and did every single one, right? Because if you go back to, like, I won't flick through, but think of the whole ambiguity versus logic. You've just literally given someone an absolute pill that suddenly makes things appear, you know, logical, and we can cope with this and we can do it. But then the problem is, if they're motivated by getting out of ambiguity as opposed to getting a good outcome, then they will religiously do this and produce reams of documentation that tick off all of these, or pay consultancies. That was the irony. Pay 150 grand for a consultancy to do it for you, so you've done no thinking whatsoever, and then delude yourself into thinking you can now govern this platform. That was kind of the damage that a model like this did. If you had a massive ambiguity aversion, and therefore the completeness or the thickness of the document was analogous to how well you have followed this model.
Sure step, man. Literally. Do you remember the whole sure step madness back in then? It was like if people didn't follow sure steps, it was just like, oh no, And then when you went into business and deals, they're like, what methodology are you using? Sure steps. And everyone was like, okay, that's great. And actually, it didn't really help, because you still need to wrap your own business rules around it. It's the same with the COE starter kit. It's kind of like you can build as much technical process, et cetera, but if that organization isn't able to wrap their own translation around that process, it's useless.
And for that reason,
it's the same every time.
For that reason, speaking of COE, because that's a fantastic point, I find with COE, the first thing I do before anything else is I just put the monitoring in and I just put the dashboards up, because what you've done there is you've reduced the number of unknown unknowns. So you've made it less ambiguous, because now people have, like, I don't even worry about the automated, retirement of apps and stuff like that. Every client does that differently. I don't worry about so much the COE for that. But absolutely, I always put the data in so you can make decisions, but I don't take it any further. And I get asked to and I refuse, because I'm like, you're not ready for this, And again, if I look at you and you're driven from running away from ambiguity, I need to keep you here longer. There's a better way to do this.
Spot on, man. I run into it all the time. I mean, I've had people saying, oh, we've installed the starter kit. I'm like, okay, and a Badger? What now? Like, what's your plan? And that's the thing, because this is one of the reasons I want to go back and try and actually implement stuff, because I need people to know that this is a starter kit. Right? Yeah. It's a way. The videos you made around that starter kit are amazing, man. Honestly, I've got to tell you, I learned a lot from them. But people still think that it's a golden ticket, right? Implementing the SharePoint governance framework. It's like
I need to put COE on this slide. In fact, for exactly what you're describing.
We should actually do a session on that, man. But give me 2 months just to get my hands really dirty, because what I'm going to do, one of my first things I'm going to do is I'm going to pull it apart. Sounds bad, but it's what you've got to break stuff down before you understand completely what's under the hood, and then sort of rebuild the pieces that I know will work, that I need and I want. Sounds terrible, but that's what's going to happen. And once I've done that, and I'll figure out the process. But I need people to know that when we start implementing stuff like this, it has got to be taken as this is just a mere facilitator to what you can do from a wider perspective of the process.
So, you know that diagram earlier where I showed you here, sad baby, happy baby here, there, and I wrote governance. If you imagine what happens is, this is an interesting subtle thought. Take this SharePoint governance thing, right? Now, imagine I put that in the middle of that diagram where I had here. In fact, I'm going to bring it up because it's an important point. If I go back up here, right? So, this will do. So this one that says governance, imagine right there, that says Center of Excellence Starter Kit, or it says SharePoint Governance Framework, whatever. Now, if you're using it as it's intended and you're always doing it in the context of your goal, what you want to aspire to, then you'll use it properly. If you have a platitude up here and you haven't realized it and you're chasing a platitude, then the meaning is going to end up down here. And so you end up starting to do the paint by numbers approach to governance. And what you're actually doing when you think about it is governance is now the end, right? As opposed to the means to the end. And then the minute it's the end, you've lost sight on why you're doing it, and you do it very kind of religiously. And so I see that's a very common pattern I see everywhere. I see it in people going to Agile for the first time. They're so, am I doing it right? As opposed to, so I find a universal pattern is to shift people from remembering these are means to an end, and always going, well, if you had this, how are things be different to now?
Yeah. I say that to people a lot. It's kind of like governance is not the goal. Governance is a mechanism to reach the goal, and it's part of it. So it's essentially, I don't want to. This is going to take it down a couple of notches, and it's not meant to. But governance is often a byproduct of having an idea, right?
Yep.
And when you've got that idea goal, there has to be a way to reach it, right? And governance just provides those guardrails.
Governance is a means to an end. That's it. Like, if someone asked me to define governance, I'm like, the minute you define governance, you've confused the means to the end. Because if you're guiding, you know what I mean? Because the definition, if you're following it, that's paint by numbers kind of, just what a waste of time and money if you don't go, you know, like I've got one organization right now, luckily for me, I've looked at their strategic plan. They want to become incredibly innovative. They're not right now. So I am governing things fundamentally differently to how you would govern if, for example, I was a, you know, security agency and it was all about confidentiality and maintaining that. So, you know, the goal, obviously the means is driven by the end. But I'm going to give you a little bit more on problem stuff as well. I'm not done, Chris. I'm not done. All right, see what you think of this. So, you know, that complex, complicated, that's down here. And this is just how much, I guess, thinking and research work's been done. What you're seeing here is a table of a whole bunch of luminaries from various different disciplines. These are top people in their field, right? You know, and some of these names, anyone doing an MBA would know them. And everyone comes from different disciplines. And so my thing is actually Rittel and Weber and the concept of wicked problem. But you notice, you know, they all characterize that the complex one, or sorry, the complicated one, you see that, you know, Heifetz called it a technical problem. Ackoff called it a problem because the problem's been given to you. And then on the other side, they all recognize this idea that there was this other class of problems that had different characteristics. So, and you can see the kind of terminology, you know, wicked problem, a mess. And Herbert Simon, like this dude came up with this in the 60s. This is like 50 years old. This is not like dreamt up in the last 10 years or anything. And Rittel and Weber, 1968, you know, these are 40, 50-year-old ideas, right? And they just didn't seem to get mainstream acceptance in corporates for such a long time. So you get the idea, right? Yeah, so we're not gonna go through every single one of these. Just rest assured that this is basically a very rich vein. If you really wanted to be a train spotter, you could read up on every one of these, find they come from completely different disciplines, and they're telling you the same thing. So here's wicked problems, and of course there's kind of the, you know, you can see straight up it's commensurate to the ambiguity thing. All right, so here was wicked problem. It was used in urban planning, the design of cities, right? Road networks, things like that. And it said it was difficult or impossible to solve because of incomplete, contradictory, and changing requirements that are difficult to recognize. And because of complex interdependencies, you solve one aspect of a wicked problem and then it reveals and creates others.
Yeah,
so yeah, and so I'm going to give you the characteristics of wicked problems, right? Because when I read this like 12 years ago after this failed SharePoint project, that SharePoint versus Skype, this is how I discovered it after that. And I'm interested if you've ever had these characteristics happen to you in, for like CRM or Dynamics type projects or any projects you've done in IT. Ready? All right. Each time a solution is proposed, understanding of the problem changes.
Yeah.
And therefore, because of the first one, the wicked problems have no stopping rule because you cannot definitively prove that all solutions are being considered. And also with pace of change, even Microsoft does that to you where, you know, 3 months later, you're like, oh, no, now we have Dataverse for Teams. So, you know, there's this curveball that we all have to think about as well, right?
Yep.
So ever had that one?
Yeah.
This is also the whole analysis paralysis, if you like, right? Solutions differ based on interest, values, and ideology of participants. I've been doing it for this long that actually in the old days it used to be Linux. You know, like I don't know what the problem is so long as it's open source to solve it. Now that Apple became evil and confused all the geeks, now Microsoft aren't evil anymore. It's changed. Now it's very much AWS versus Power Platform is what I'm seeing a lot. You know, the bespoke guys. So I find it funny that the disruptors that got the server huggers into the cloud now kind of get disrupted by platform as a service and low code. And you're seeing the same behavior. They've become the server huggers again in a way. So I don't know if you're seeing that same kind of thing.
Well, this solution based on interest is exactly what I was saying around the tech sphere. It's kind of like, I do this stuff really well, so I'm just going to use it. And
yeah,
I've got that in a slide deck, actually. It's kind of like you're always going to pick the thing that you know the best to solve the problem. Absolutely. But you have to, right now, in Power Platform in specific, you have to be able to consider outside solutions. And Paul, that is something I didn't and wasn't able to do until about a year and a half ago to a year ago.
Well, it's probably, you know, I reckon that's part of becoming a good architect, you know,
yeah.
Like, yeah, no, totally. All right, I'll keep going. Now, by the way, I was literally going through this, just coming off this failed project, ticking the box, right?
Yeah.
and just going, oh my God, this is exactly like, oh, I've got a word for it now. I had a wicked problem. It's a thing. There's a phenomena here, and I stopped beating myself up about it. And then I started looking at, well, how do you deal with wicked problems? So here's the other one. Wicked problem can be explained in numerous ways, serving the attention of who is explaining it. Now, the context here, by the way, is wicked problems. The original context of them before the design thinking folks went and hijacked the term was actually the real complex, like Middle East or gun control in America. And that's a good example, because in that wicked problem, gun control, you'll have some people will tell you it's a mental health problem, and some people will tell you it's a problem around access to, like lethal weapons. Irrespective of who's right, how can you come up with a solution if both parties don't even agree on what the problem is? So you're back to the whole problem formulation.
And that's you know what, man, that's spot on, because like I see that in the strategic concept with the Power Platform around, defining a way to solve the issue, but what is the actual issue? And you see that a lot. Like,
Yep.
you get people from different departments all over the business, and they'll whinge about the same thing in different ways and lay blame in many different ways. But like, it's finding. I keep on telling people, like, stop looking for the outlier and look for the pattern. And when you find the outlier,
That's I'm going to show you later exactly how I do that too. That's my job. My job is basically facilitating emerging of patterns, exactly as you described. That's basically what I do.
Yeah, I reckon I literally will be doing the same thing.
Well, you might find the way we do it interesting then. Okay, here's another one. Here's another one about wicked problems. This is very, I think Dynamics has got this aspect to it. It can be hard to go back. You got a one shot, so the cost of going back is always infinitely more expensive than the cost of going there in the first place. And Rittel, when he came up with the concept of wicked problems in the 60s or late 60s, he basically said you can't build a freeway to see how it works.
No, right? Absolutely. Yeah.
And whereas that's one thing where us in the technology space, well, we can build a freeway and see how it works. If you design it the right way, we can prototype in such a way where we test certain assumptions. So I think that one, it's definitely the case. And SharePoint is massive in this way, because I mean, once you go down that road and you've got all that data and that metadata in there, do you really want to go back from that? The amount of effort it takes. You would have been involved in legacy information management efforts to pull things into Dynamics or do transformations at scale, and dealing with the ghosts of implementations past or technical debt past. But that's basically that characteristic. So how are we going so far? And you're ticking the box as well?
Yeah, scarily I am.
Okay, every wicked problem can be considered to be a symptom of another problem. And so that's when you're in a conversation, you start out with one particular technology issue, and suddenly you blink, and then you're surrounded by 10 people and you're questioning the whole strategic intent and direction of the, those sort of water cooler conversations that become half of the room, the open plan area, just everyone's popped up over their cubicles and contributing.
It's the problem chain.
Yep. With a wicked problem, you will not know you've succeeded until after taking an action. You cannot know in advance that there is literally no best practice, because if there was a best practice, it wouldn't be wicked, because for it to be wicked, it has to have that unpredictability and the goalposts keep moving on you, and you can't sense those patterns that you're looking for, in a truly wicked problem.
I think this is probably the only one I'll argue so far, and the reason is because, okay, so I've got a theory around this, and I didn't call them wicked problems before, but I'm going to start calling them that now because it's freaking smart. Do you think, and maybe this is more of like a question, because do you think that you can take a wicked problem, because a wicked problem can be magnanimous in proportions, or it can be quite small, all depending, but ambiguous. Do you think, okay, that it's possible to break this type of a problem down into chunks, like a slab of chocolate, right? And then look for smaller pieces to succeed at from a pattern perspective, thus solving parts of the wider problem?
My last slide is going to answer that question specifically, because I agree with you, by the way, I don't disagree, but I'll put it in just go back to the context of how this term was coined, right? You're talking about climate change, you're talking about gun control, you're talking about healthcare, right? You're talking about Brexit. That's the context of wicked problems in terms of, Brexit's a great wicked problem that's playing out. You're living it right now. You're living that history. So Now, if you turn it into IT, I'm actually about to argue with you that IT is unlikely to be a truly wicked problem, right? But no, there are some big ass crazy systems, particularly in the health sector, that have become, big, crazily expensive sort of white elephants. Happened in Australia. I think it's happened in the UK as well. But I actually, I've got one other slide that actually, it's not like one or the other. It's not tame or wicked. There's degrees of wickedness, right? So I'm just sort of giving you this is my mental radar that if you were talking to me now and you had a problem and I was thinking about Power Platform as your friendly neighborhood architect, as you're talking to me, literally these are the mental tick boxes that I'm listening for, just to sort of determine the level of wickedness that I might be dealing with. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I got it. 100%.
Okay. And the last one, with the wicked problem, you don't have the right to be wrong. This is the essence of the scientific method, right? So in academia, right, you can go out and make any theory you want about how the universe works, and no one is going to blame you if you're wrong, because the point is understanding improves by the testing of your theory, right? That's the absolute essence of the scientific method, and it has led to incredible things. I mean, we can get a spacecraft to Pluto with extreme accuracy now and tell you down to the hour when it's going to be there, because Pluto is not about to change its orbit, right? Its orbit, and that's because of the testing of theories and the refinement of them over time, over the last couple of hundred years. Well, with the wicked problem, you're on the hook, right? So it's on you, the outcome. You are going to take and sort of cop personal accountability for that as well. So that was the key kind of one there. So does that kind of make sense? That's wicked problems, right? And to your point, it is there. It's this one. A bit of a Spinal Tap reference for you. So if you, just to prove that it's not a one versus the other, it's a spectrum, right? And I always like that Spinal Tap, where the amplifier goes to 11.
Yeah.
Right. So we even called it the Culmsee and it goes to 11 model of problem ambiguity. We were taking the piss, but legit, that's what we called it. And so you got Tame at one end, and you see how kind of, you can see how like the level of ambiguity starts to ratchet up. And to your point, because you were absolutely correct, most organizational problems are not wicked, because despite what might happen on the surface, most people in organizations genuinely want to see a better place to where they are now, most of the time, unless it's pure pathology, right? And that's when it goes crazy. But for the most part, I think that probably we're dealing with emergent, contingent, complex, kind of a 7, 8, 9, maybe, or even 6, 7, 8, 9. You're dealing with the right half, and certainly the Power Platform is. But you know how, like, you take anything with Power Platform, and if you take out the fact that you're doing a really basic little app for someone, but if you do a sophisticated app, you got to ask yourself, are you asking people to change their behaviors? Yes. If you're reconceptualizing a process. Do people necessarily believe that there's a problem at this point? And if the answer is no, then you see that the dial is starting to move. So, but I've certainly gone into some organizations and felt that this is more, I reckon it's about a sort of 3 out of 10 on the spectrum. Yeah, there's a couple of aspects, but they can be managed, But I've been to other organizations where, you've still got server huggers, you're still like dealing with Windows 7 SOEs and IE11. You're dealing with extreme conservatism, lock down everything, and then they want to be innovative, and they want the best practice for being innovative. Can you imagine? I've deliberately used certain terminology there that my little mental alarm bells go off, when all of those sort of combinations of things go together. But that's kind of, for me, the essence of architecture is actually work out where you are on that problem space and then use the tools to measure it with where you are, and a Gantt chart works fantastic down here, right? And in fact, a Scrum sprint works particularly well in some of these, but it even starts to break down as you go over here. Design thinking tools start to come in over here, but they fall away when you get down here, right?
Yeah. The design thinking pieces now, Microsoft have gone pretty big on that because of the strategic concepts around the platform.
Yeah,
and I've seen it. It's exactly this. They don't know. People don't know how to define the problem. So the design thinking workshops that they're running, they really help. And like I've seen some of them working, Paul, they are awesome. But that's exactly it, is that in this whole, I love this, by the way. This is exactly what I've been talking around with that whole, the Power Platform scale of, I don't want to call them apps, solution types, right? So we've spoken about this, like basic versus concept and all of this. This is a far better way to measure that. I actually think, man, we could do some really kick-ass stuff with this around helping people gauge, not from a COE perspective, but from number one, ideation perspective, and also like problem recognition around where their stuff actually sits. And here's the thing, in no world can a Tame problem be solved at the same cost as a Wicked problem.
Oh, no, absolutely not. Like the Tame problems are so easy. You know what a Tame problem is? The Tame problem is when the business, a citizen developer comes to you, right, and has a fairly distinct paper process that is not complex, it doesn't have complex interdependencies or connections to other tools, and says to you, I see the value here, I want this fixed, please help me with it. That's a Tame problem where you'll get heaps of goodwill, heaps of value creation, and you're not boiling the ocean, right? That's right. The example of one that I'd put in the complex is when like an organization that came to me and said, okay, Paul, we want to become more innovative. We have a problem. We're too conservative. We want to become more innovative. We think the Power Platform's a way to do it. So can you come in and teach us the best practices on how to be innovative?
So here's a question for you, man. Okay, so this is the golden nuggets around exactly that. So that's strategic, right? Okay, and you don't have to answer this, by the way, but like the question that I get asked a lot is that on a targeted solution, like a Tame, technical, familiar, even structured and complicated problem, I would say up to level 5, you know how to solve that mostly, I would say. So you can put in a targeted solution and whack that problem out pretty quickly. Okay, I love that adaptive one because that is really tough, right? But when you start looking at a strategy perspective, when do people pay you for value? Because here, people are paying you for value because you've solved something. You've checked a box and that provides value. But I would actually say from adaptive, from 0.6, right, moving up into to Wicked, when are you providing value? So you might be providing like, I don't know, advisory services around, I want to change the way that this organization becomes innovative. So like we'll teach you how to use Power Platform. We'll teach you how to, build apps and interact with data. But you're not actually solving a problem yet. So when in that process is the value button pressed?
No, great question. So I'll keep it around the adaptive contingent, just so it's not pathology level. The way we typically do that is actually, it's to be honest, it's actually not that hard, even for big organizations. But the way we would typically approach something like that is there's a strategic piece, and I will explain to people how to recognize the problem you're dealing with. I'll again, COE I put in just to reduce that the unknown unknowns become known unknowns. You know how many apps, you know the makers, you have all that. There's one big teddy bear straight away that you've sort of handed to people that drop the ambiguity. But you're still not going to build capability without building stuff. Right. So, while we're building I'm doing it right now. I built actually a governance plan I'm really quite proud of because it's completely contextually driven to the organization. It's not a template. And so while that governance plan is being built, there was a whole bunch of legacy InfoPath forms that existed. And so it turns out COE told us they've got a citizen dev who's had a crack at it. And so we empowered this particular citizen developer to get rid of these legacy InfoPath forms and convert them on. So straight away, you're creating value, and they did it very quickly. It was not unnoticed that it took them 6 months to get those InfoPath forms built in the first place. And there was and the nice thing about that was InfoPath's retired, right? This is client-side InfoPath, right? And so it's not part of the Office suite anymore. They had to move this stuff. And so the fact that we were able to basically get it shifted in a few days, right, and have a functioning prototype, and it took a couple of weeks to get it fully, ironed out and sorted out. It was linking to SQL on-prem, Fire Gateway, things like that. But that was that's that pivot thinking. You go back to pivot thinking, right? We're solving a logical Tame problem while at the same time we're building capability on the adaptive contingent to teach people how future problems might get solved. Does that make sense?
Spot on. Yeah, absolutely. I really love that. I see a lot of that type of behavior coming up in the partner base actually, but what I always get asked is that where like that value button is a hard one to push when you're doing strategy platform. it's really tough. And like, you provided value because you solved the problem, and
Well,
you did it. You did two
here's-
things. Yeah.
I'll say one thing about that.
Yeah.
This world, two things actually. This world is the management consulting world, and this world is the system integrator world. Okay, I see those as quite distinct. Now, most management consultants suck, right? And the reason they suck is they peddle models. They literally play to ambiguity and tolerance and sell you the 5 steps to awesomeness or the patented, 7 pillars of blah, blah, whatever.
Yeah.
And so they peddle models, and they are not building capability. They're just giving you a teddy bear, right? And paying and charging you a hell of a lot of money to get a bum on a seat to help you work that through. So I find that this is all about building capability, right? It's building collaborative capability, and it's building ambiguity tolerance capability.